out. What are we seeing as far as test results go? Are we seeing a difference in the amount of pesticides that were in products? There's more being caught. Do we see better compliance? Any of those types of things? Have we seen any type of uptick in heavy metals? And we may have to revisit that at a later meeting because that's not a mandatory test, but it'd be interesting to hear from folks on what they're seeing. And then also we're also looking at there was some flexibility created in these particular rules around the lot sizes. And so is that working as a benefit as was described in the result of rulemaking? And so that's really, some of the focus that we want to be able to dive into with these particular questions and the evaluation of this rule set. So again, like we said last time, it's really our first follow-up with any type of rule evaluation. This is something we'd like to do. Obviously, we're going to have to perfect this as we continue to go. So we appreciate patience and bearing with us as we develop this type of evaluation tool for rule implementation or post-rule implementation. So I want to open this up to the group, and we can get some general feedback on. And this, again, isn't how it was implemented. It wasn't what's in decided to be in rule and what wasn't decided to be in rule. It's based on the rules that were passed. Is this working? Is it meeting the expectations? And are there any unintended consequences that we should be aware of that was a result that we hadn't thought of as the rule was developing? So I see Amber's hand. Go ahead. Kick us off.
Yeah, I guess it just in some regard reflective of the emails that were sent before this meeting, it would be great to hear what the intended outcomes were of these rules changes. To some degree, I'm not sure that was made very clear of what the intended outcome of these rules changes were, and that might be a better way for us to start evaluating if they're working or not.
Sure. So I'll chime in and then Kathy will jump in. Go ahead, Kathy.
Can I just say one thing really quickly? Yep. I put in the chat, just as a reminder, we are recording this meeting, so we can put it up on our outward-facing webpage if anyone wants to listen to it who wasn't able to attend today. And then also it really helps us with transcription after the meeting when we send it to our transcription service for note-taking. That's all I wanted to say, Justin, just as a reminder, we're being recorded. So
thanks. I always skip over some of the technical issues at the beginning because I want to just jump in. So thanks for the question, Amber. Really what we are looking at as we're developing these pesticide testing rules was improvements on the quality control for consumers. So we have safer product for them. There were concerns around how much product may have been out on the market that was questionable. And so as many people know, we intended to bring in both heavy metal and pesticide testing. Rules were adjusted and refined during the process, and we ended up having mandatory pesticide testing. And so really, that was the focus is really around are these rules creating a safer product on the market? And how should we be evaluating what that looks like? And so that was the primary intent. Kathy, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I don't. I think you stated it really well, Justin. I think the other thing that we wanted to pay close attention to was whether or not this gave our licensees, so those are the folks who must comply with these rules, are cannabis producers and processors, the kind of flexibility that they needed to be able to get their product to market. And I think on the previously our rules had some very small sample sizes, so we wanted to provide that flexibility and then remove some of one of the testing gates at least to getting product to market. So that was something that we were very interested in as well, to provide that flexibility that cannabis businesses might need. And I'll stop right there.
And I should mention before we get too far into this, because folks are probably wondering, Jeff may be able to make it. We're not quite sure yet. He had some issues come up this morning. And so he may not be able to make it. And so Kathy and I are going to just take the lead today on this particular topic. So just kind of opening it up, I suppose let's start with just the fact of do you as licensees out there, do you believe the product that's now going onto the market is a safer product than it was previous to the rules? Danielle.
Oh, you can see me. I was like, where's my hand? I would ask that, and we can make guesses, but it would be great. Has the LCB pulled any product from retail shelves to test with the WSDA? That's how we would know what the answer to that question is.
Okay, and I don't have that answer today. So, but we also need to look at this not only from a limited number of samples. Oops.
Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. If we go out and we do some sampling, quite frankly, I'm not sure it's going to be statistically significant based on the amount of samples that we can collect through that process, given our limited resources. So we also need to be looking at this from the evaluation of this is also coming from your perspective on, do you feel like there is a higher quality product going out to consumers that is safer than it was before? All right, Amber, I see your hand up.
Oh, I definitely don't think I was the first one, so I'll wait my turn.
Oh, okay. Looks like, sorry, I see the numbers now. Tara.
Sure, thanks. To answer that question specifically, I mean, theoretically, that pesticide tests are being done now, then we would hope that the products that are on the market are representative. But the biggest concern that I have goes back to that question of, they're still self-selected samples. So it worries me that it's still not representative of what is actually being consumed in the general public. Kind of to piggyback off of Danielle's question about, off the shelf sampling, that it's really easy to make sure that that sample that's being sent to the QA lab doesn't have pesticides. But does it really represent what's out there on the market is a concern.
Okay, and is there something behind that concern? I mean, do we have any observations that would lead somebody to believe that that's not the case right now?
I mean, just in my experience, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that Washington is one of the very few states with recreational cannabis decriminalization that doesn't have samples that are selected by the state or the quality assurance testing laboratory directly. And it's just something that every farm, every processor does in-house. And so, in my experience working for a licensee, then I can see how easy it would be to falsify what those test results are.
Okay. Amber, you are number 2 now.
I would just echo what Tara says. I mean, it's kind of pointless to talk about a lot of downstream science if the licensee is allowed to self-sample. So that's I would just like to echo what she said. Oh, sorry, I would like to add one more thing.
Sure.
It's not clear that all of the labs that are testing for pesticides are even able to see all of the compounds as well. So it's not clear that everybody is even, screening for the same sets of molecules. So, having some examples of how the LCB has attempted to do, any sort of oversight in terms of pulling samples or making label comparisons or anything like that, to data that was submitted to the system versus, labels that get printed or samples that get sold on stores, I think that would go a long way to having people have a little bit of trust that, the LCB isn't just waiting for somebody to tattle, but, they're having a handle on enforceable rules that they put on the books.
Okay. Danielle, you're number 3.
Okay, so I have a couple of things. So one is that it's my understanding that the LCB had totally looked into not self-selecting samples and basically didn't do third-party sampling because of the cost that it would be involved. Is that an accurate statement? Like, this is not a new conversation for you guys, right? So
Correct. Kathy, do you want
so
to chime in? But yeah, there was definitely feedback on cost associations with that. And it's not the issue isn't necessarily that the LCB is not interested in increase or improving that integrity. But the cost association with that is not something that the LCB can just stand up on its own. We don't have the funding to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and so there was a document that we put together that's still up on our website that really dives deeply into what third-party sampling would cost. And there was concern, Tara, I think I heard it from you and from Amber as well. And there was interest in maybe having WSDA have a branch that would go out to farms and do sampling, pull the sample so there you could have that sample integrity that I think you're referring to. And we did pencil that out in terms of cost, FTEs, so on and so forth. The other thing to remember that if a program like that, if that's something that folks are interested in a program, or I'm sorry, if that's a program that folks are interested in, that would take a legislative action to happen. Our LCB enforcement agents doesn't have the capacity at this point to send folks out to do sampling as well. So we'd have to, there's a significant amount of infrastructure that would have to be built out there as well. And I'll stop there. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, just to be clear, so it's not taken out of context. We don't have the capacity to go and sample from every farm that's out there to do those quality controls as you're indicating, but we are doing some enforcement oversight through our sampling program. So it's not that we're not doing anything, but it's the fact that we can't get out and do that for licensees across the state.
So along those lines, then, yeah, you had mentioned that the LCB doesn't have the resources to pull product from the retail shelves. Is there, since we've had product pulled from us from randomly from the LCB, is there a reason we can't shift that to retailers so that we're getting a more representative? If the purpose is consumer safety, if we shifted that to retailers, wouldn't that be a better indicator if A, the new rules are working, and B, I don't know what B is.
Okay. Well, we'll make a note of that. I don't have necessarily the answers for you on that front, because I think on the opposite side of that spectrum, when you're looking at the oversight for the product going through the process and trying to make sure that it's a viable product before it gets to retailers. We don't want things to go to retailers and that being the only place that we're looking at it. And then, well, it's already too late. It's in customers' hands. So we want to be able to sample before it gets to retail to make sure that if we're seeing something that it can get detected before it goes into a consumer's hand. So
And
I'm going to go ahead.
I hear that. Having been through the system from a producer processor side, having the LCB come in to pull samples to take, it'd be really easy to fake it. It'd be really easy to pass the tests and not get you guys to catch what it is you're looking for. And I know Oregon, they send out recall notices that might be 1, 2, 3 years old, because they want to at least let the public know, which obviously that product has already been sold through, but at least now you know what licensees you're looking at that have been disingenuous about following the rules.
Okay.
There is precedent in other states.
Megan.
Hello. I work in a lab. I want to say pesticides is at least sort of working because we personally have seen fails come through. So there's at least some being caught in the system. I think it's a very dynamic problem for sampling because you could regionally lock farms going to certain labs if the labs have to go out and sample. And it'd be a real hard problem to solve.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the challenge in that front is that the labs typically are covering a particular geography, and so that's kind of representative of that particular area of those licensees going to them.
You can kind of see it. There is terpene transit, so people can send it from far away, but we're the only lab in the Spokane area. And if we had to go out and sample, we would be limiting farms' choices in labs.
Got it. Okay. All right, so I think Micah, you were next.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for letting me be here. And so just to kind of chime into this conversation about self-sampling and I also want to introduce into that same conversation the fact that we currently, the program tests for allowed and disallowed pesticides in the same way, under the same system, and sort of throughout the process of developing these rules, our organization was really interested in seeing different approaches to those two different issues, because one is about proper application and using products in a way that doesn't cause a failure in these tests, and the other is about preventing people from using things that they're not allowed to use, and while also protecting our supply chain from contaminants and drift from those pesticides that are used in the broader world. So we still hold that there is an issue by having these different issues sort of combined into the same system. And we do think that rather than lot and batch level testing for a lot of this, that there's real value in pursuing sort of a more proactive compliance approach, like we see with a WSDA, where it's a more like their program for a lot of pesticides is about getting farmers to use them in a way that's safe, and that's built into the system. And I do think, especially with the allowable pesticides that are on the list that we're testing for, there are ways that we could get more benefit from an approach like that, where we're proactively engaging in farm level testing versus trying to like create a sampling system for batches that can be both manipulated and just done poorly and not get the results that it needs to, because so much of the type of testing we're doing is about sampling. And so I just kind of want to flag that broader issue here, that and to answer your question, is I don't think we're doing as much as we can with the testing to make sure the supply chain is as safe as it could be with a different approach.
So are you saying that the current system is not working as intended?
I would say yes, it's not working. Correct. I don't believe it's working as intended.
Okay. Jay.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. First, just to respond to Amber's comment about it's not clear that labs can do the pesticides. I'm not sure where that comes from, other than the one of our competitors that put out that false statement. We've certainly been thoroughly investigated by the LCB with regard to that. It basically comes down to people not being aware of advances in mass spectrometry. But anyway, as far as I'm concerned, I have no awareness of that statement being anywhere near true. And then after that, as far as the sampling goes, or how things are going with this system, I mean, we're failing lots for pesticides. There's no doubt about it. We're flagging things that weren't flagged before. It's not clear to me that they're not making it on the market. That would require other information. But as long as, and as you guys know, sampling has been my thing for 5 years. But with the increases of sample sizes or lot sizes up to, 50 pounds, I think when you add that in with the fact that people are self-selecting samples, it just compounds that problem, right? I mean, if you have, maybe 5 pounds was too small, maybe 10 or 20 is more reasonable. But if you figure if you had more, if people had to do more lots out of their one harvest, you'd have a greater chance of catching something, as opposed to just lumping it all into one 50-pound lot. So like I said, I understand the need or the desire to have larger lots to help offset the cost of pesticides. But also on top of that, limiting choices, some combination of this pesticide rule and the lot sizes. I mean, we've had 2 labs go out of business since these laws have been put in place. So, I feel like I mean, I guess it's kind of working, but as was said, until the LCB is starting pulling samples on the retail side, we really won't know. But so anyway, I'll just leave it with that for now.
Okay, Daniel.
Thanks. So I actually have some numbers on that, and this is the small sampling, but for our company, we had a decrease of 45% in testing costs in Q3 and 4 of 2022 compared to 2021. That said, I know another tier 2 who's very, very comparable to us, and they had a 33% increase in testing costs. And so it really comes down, from a grower standpoint, it really comes down to how we grow and whether we're willing to change the way we grow in order to be economically competitive with these rules. So that's just data out there. I like the lot sizes this size, but we grow 1 strain per room per harvest, right? Like there's not other stuff in there.
Okay. So one of the things that I'm hearing, and I'm not sure that, so we'll have to, continue to evaluate these questions, is the fact that it sounds from what I gather from the group so far that has shared is we're really not going to know whether this is going to be, we're not going to be able to evaluate this unless there is samples taken to a degree out of the retail shops to be able to evaluate whether or not something is happening there. So, if that's truly the case, that we can't do an evaluation, then that's going to have to refocus our point here, because we don't want to waste everybody's time to say, okay, there's really no way to evaluate this from your perspective unless we're doing some other type of data collection. So, and I totally understand and get that. So I just want to make sure that we're capturing that, because we don't want to spin our wheels and waste people's time if that's the case. So Amber, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's even the possibility of scanning the CCRS data to see if samples that labs uploaded that have failed are in fact getting transported and sold to stores or being reported as inventory by the stores, right? There's no testing involved with that. It's just a data analysis project. But I don't know if that's ideally or not ideally. In theory, someone would change the lot number for a passing, but it's unclear, who's monitoring the data that comes in during transfers. I mean, there's nothing stopping anybody from selling product that's failed, really, aside from the store looking very closely at the data themselves. I mean, let's be real. I've literally have not had one phone call since the rules changed that I can't sell my product because XYZ data hasn't gone through, like not once. So that leads me to believe that there's like no barriers or, checks and balances between me assigning a failing sample and then that product not ending up on a store somewhere.
Okay. And so previous state, were you getting those types of calls?
Yeah, all the time. There were glitches in the system, but then we were able to there was product being prevented from being sold because there was a fail on it for some reason that wasn't actually real. We were able to go in and update that, and then that product was able to be sold. But since the rules changed, I've literally not had one of those phone calls.
Okay.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, since CCRS, or since one of the traceability transfers, producer processors have had the ability to change test results from failing to passing, right? So if you get a test result you don't like, you change it in the system. There's nothing to keep, unless somebody is analyzing that data out there, there's nothing to keep people from doing that, especially when the margins are as thin as they are for producer processors. And you would have to have a special type of person who's like, oh, I'm either going to go out of business or I can change these testing results and be able to at least get some sort of income coming in to make rent or payroll or whatever else. So
do we have any indications of that actually happening?
I can't talk for anybody else. We haven't done it, but I am telling you that it is very, very easy for producer processors to do that.
I mean, I think one of the things, and I hear that type of perspective a number of times, but I think what's challenging for us is it seems like there's a lot of concern about what people can do, but there's not a lot of backing on what's actually being done. And do we, create policy based on worst case scenario and mistrust of everybody in the industry? I'm not so sure that's the appropriate way to make policy. And so that's why I'm asking these kind of questions. If we have something there, then okay, and it's not that we're going to rush out and do something immediately based on what somebody shares, but we have to have an understanding of those perspectives versus, this kind of a broad swath of, hey, everybody can do this. Okay, well, does that mean it's happening or not? I mean, that's a tough thing to be able to assess as well. But go ahead.
And I 100% appreciate that opinion. I do not want to create regulations and policies to the lowest common denominator, which brings us back to retail sampling, because then if people are being unscrupulous or not, or if they're changing test results. And so then you don't actually have to change policy or regulations out there. Now you have people on your radar that you're like, hey, this person has done something unscrupulous. Let's keep an eye on them.
Okay. Jay, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to second what Amber said about, not getting any reports that like we used to get as far as, hey, my results aren't in, or, something's failed, I can't sell it. We definitely haven't had that anymore with CCRS. And I just like one other side on that. On the other side of CCRS, with the LEAF system, with all of its problems, it did provide us with the labs of knowing which tests were required for a sample. So if somebody sent us in a sample and it, they didn't request mycotoxin testing, but LEAF would tell us, hey, this sample hasn't had mycotoxin testing, and we could either call the person up and say, hey, you need this. So we're kind of missing that, which is a big aid to us. And now, for instance, like I said, I've given this example before, like an extract for inhalation could be sent to us, which is just potency only. We have no idea if that oil has ever been tested, right? And so but that's what the person wants. We have no way to verify. We test it. We give them a potency only COA. Now they have a COA they can sell that oil with. I don't know how anybody would track it to know if it had all the the residual solvents done on it, something like that. So I mean, I think CCR the lack of sort of that redundancy in the CCRS is also compounding some of these problems.
Okay. I'm just trying to think how I want to think about that. So I'll have to come back to that as I'm mulling it over here. So I appreciate you sharing that. I see. So that was Jay and Micah. I think you're next.
I was actually just sort of hopping in to talk about the CCRS and the change from a central traceability system to a report and audit system, and that's why we're not seeing those flags come up, because there's no central system to stop people from making a transfer. However, our traceability software still does do that for us. So we can't, unless we go and manually change it to pretend that it passed the test when it didn't, it does receive that information. And some of the stuff that's being talked about as far as information about different tests that are needed on different samples, that's stuff we could integrate into the WCIA JSON link that we all pretty much use to transfer product between each other. So that's in our control as an industry. We have an organization where we can modify that, and we could absolutely add stuff to that would create those sort of checks and balances automatically versus manually. And that's just us kind of coordinating with each other to put some of those things into place. And of course, it all depends on people being honest, but there are things we could do as an industry on our side of the fence with a report and audit system to still get some of that interoperability that we enjoyed from the centralized system. So I just want to say that's out there. It's available to us. There's the start of that infrastructure there. We can build on it as much as we'd like. It's just a matter of us putting that energy in there. So just to say, we're not dependent on them bringing back a central traceability system to get some of that functionality. We can build some of that for ourselves. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Who
Okay.
do we talk to about that, Micah? The traceability third-party people that put that like group together?
Yeah, there's an alliance of integrators that work together on that. A bunch of folks in this call from the labs are involved in that because the labs obviously have a huge role in that functionality. So that's definitely a space I think we could work on.
Excellent. Megan.
I wanted to piggyback back on that one. It's real hard to follow like retesting. So say bacteria failed for whatever reason and they applied for a retest. We don't always get the farm sending us the parent lot, so we can't actually match that up because it's a whole new sampling. It has a whole new ID. So following all those numbers around and trying to play tag with them is like super frustrating because then I have to call and like most of the time I just ask them to email me what they received from the LCB, like, to prove that they got that okayed. But then again, if they just put it on a manifest, it's a new ID. I don't know where that came from unless they send us the JSONs, which we like the JSONs. They do give us the information. Not everybody uses them yet. So how we track everything can be frustrating, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it sounds like, and maybe I'm not interpreting this appropriately, so please correct me. One of the things that we were trying to do with how the pesticide testing and the rules were developed was to allow for flexibility and basically looking at the end product, if you will. So whatever's going to be going out to the consumer is what we wanted to make sure was safe. So if somebody harvests something and then does a test to see for themselves, okay, where am I at on this before they do anything else with that product? That wasn't necessarily something that, uh, should be avoided, but it wasn't anything that we were going to necessarily come out and say, okay, let's check on all of these particular tests, because that's not where the mandatory testing comes in. So if it goes to the lab as that kind of cursory check, and then they get the report back from the lab, and the business decides to do A, B, or C before it goes out to the consumer, then you're going to have another test. So am I hearing this right, that folks are concerned about not tracking all of the testing, or is there something else that I'm missing in that? Go ahead, Megan.
So we see quite a few end products that fail for something, and it's hard to track that fail. I've had stores call and ask specifically for like reference information on a sample they received. I can't tell them the parent lot. I can just tell them that that specific ID came through. So like there's like a failure in the whole transaction, even if it's an end product. So a lot of bulk flour that just gets packaged up, that can fail a lot for bacteria, but I can only tell you that sample ID failed, and it's the parent lot that you'd want to look at.
Okay, so let me explore that one a little bit further. So if we have this concern about how the process of the testing for these pesticides occurs, and you're not able to track that, is there something off the top of your head that you'd be able to identify as something that should be considered to improve that potential issue?
It's generally like, so your big lot is considered your parent lot. That gets broken up into like the IDs and stuff, for like selling and whatnot like that. Maybe just adding that to manifests so that we can track it in our database so that we have a copy of it. So when it gets like, comes back through, say, they got a different test, we would know that matches to that.
Okay. I think that was Megan. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name. Please correct me if I'm wrong. It's Tara, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
Tara. I understand what Megan's saying too about the lot numbers and the child lots and the parent lots. And that is an issue within itself. But even kind of taking a step back from that, you know, I haven't seen personally anything happen, but having worked for a licensee, if say I had a 5 pound lot that I sent in for testing and that failed, and then I had another lot number that sent in another, it's literally as simple as putting a sticker on that bag and putting those good test results on 5, 10, 50 pounds of flour that actually failed, and then getting it through to the retailers, and they have you know, all of the documentation that they legally need to be able to purchase it and sell it, but that doesn't prevent the consumer from getting that product. And so when you're asking earlier about, is it the best idea to create rules and legislation, you know, or you know, policies based around what the worst case scenario is, I understand that we don't want to necessarily just assume that everybody's you know, playing foul like that, but especially given the state of the industry, and like Danielle was saying, with the thin margins, like a lot of people are in their most desperate times as farmers. And so as a consumer myself, I worry about that when I'm buying anything from the store,
Okay.
of how easy it is.
All right. Let's see. I think we are to Danielle.
So yeah, just along all of that, you know, so like with edibles, you're going to test the cannabis infused product, right? But then you're going to pesticide test that. But then you're not going to pesticide test the end product. You're just going to potency test the end product. So what happens is that there's no way for a retailer to figure out whether the test results that you sent them are attached to that product, right? They don't know about your pesticide tested intermediate product if it goes with the product that you sent them, because there's no corresponding numbers to all that. So I don't know if it's a manifest thing or a COA thing where you say, hey, these are the results from, or this is the test results from this product, so that chain of custody can be identified. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you're indicating that, if I hear you right, that the there's a need for COA tracking, you know, through the product, you know, transition through the system to the retailer, so you can identify what those tests are associated with.
Yeah, and that was one of my questions to Jeff, was where our retailers and consumers are having a difficult time tracking this. How is the LCB tracking that chain of custody so that we then, as retailers and licensees and consumers, can mimic the system that you guys are using?
Yeah, and I'm not so sure that you can mimic the system that's being used. And quite frankly, you know, when we're looking at some of these types of issues, there's a lot of complaint-based investigations simply because of those resource issues. And so when we look at that type of tracking, it's going to be an audit and hand check, which isn't necessarily something that, you know, a licensee is going to be able to mimic. I mean, obviously you can do it for your own company, but you're not going to be able to do that, you know, across the industry.
Even with public records requests? So if I wanted to like check on Joe Schmo's producer processor, couldn't I get, and I had the UBI number, or I had the global ID of the final product, could I do public records request to figure out all the test results from that?
I can't answer that. I can answer the fact that you could do a public records request. Whether we can pull that record out or not, I'm not an expert on CCRS, so I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Somebody chimed in on the chat that says yes, you can, but I'm not sure I can answer that.
I would say neither Justin or I are public records officers for the agency. So that's we would leave that up to our wise public records officer to be able to provide you with a thorough response, Danielle.
So you know, from a basic foundational piece of public records, anything that comes across our threshold, that we keep these records of are matter of public record. So somebody shares something on a phone call, that's not necessarily, ending up in that area. But at the same time, if we have it, then, and it's accessible, then we have to disclose that. So, that's one way to do that. If, the agency were to get inundated with those requests and we couldn't keep up with that, then they may take quite a while to get completed. But, I know our records department does a really good job on communicating with folks, that, yeah, we received this, and, here's the estimated timeline for some of those things. But anyways, I digress. This is not necessarily about the rule evaluation. Amber.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to bring up pretty much the same example that Danielle just covered, but sort of in a slightly different situation of someone doing all the correct tests on the concentrate itself and it failing, and then just using that concentrate in an edible, and all of the lot numbers are different. And I have no idea, as a lab, what that edible was made from at all. And given the turnaround time for public records requests, am not able to use that as a way to know if that is linked in any way. So, certainly if there was a way to include any and all lot numbers, including flower, concentrate, final product, as part of the manifest and part of the COA, that would go a long way to having people's access. I mean, the issue is though, like I as a consumer, even if I had that lot number, how am I supposed to find the results for that lot number?
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, because I've thought about this a number of times, and I don't think I would be able to, as a consumer, be able to find those test results linked, even if all the numbers were there.
Okay. I think I understand that. Now, I do have a question on it's come up a couple times here around tracking the manifest, or putting some of the tracking or building it into the manifest. And in hearing the other arguments around how easy things are to potentially manipulate numbers, does that actually add value to put it onto the manifest?
Well, if they didn't cheat, somebody could just look at those numbers and then it would all match up. I mean, the idea is to make it harder to cheat than it is, to to just comply. If you just make it straightforward, and make it more complicated to cheat. I mean, I also don't want to believe that everybody's trying to get around the system, but if there's no checks or balances anywhere, I mean, I appreciate that you think your, public records people are, responsive, but I have asked a couple of times, like, hey, I just failed a couple lots. Can you confirm that this file went through? Because every other results file from certain licensees have bounced back to me with like not matching ID numbers. And then all of a sudden, the one lot that I fail suddenly doesn't bounce back to me. Can you please confirm that you've received this? I haven't even gotten in like a response that the email was received, or that they're looking into it. So, I'm just wondering, if and when you see fails come into the CCRS system, does anybody say follow up with that licensee and ask what they did with that lot? Ask for the camera footage for, when they destroyed it or when they cleaned it up and converted it. I don't know, as a place to start.
Okay. Looks like Danielle again. No? Okay. Your hand's still up. So, Micah?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to hop in again on the kind of nested lot issue, and just say there's kind of two things going on there. One is that it's cumbersome for everybody, and two is that it's potentially manipulatable. But I think those are two pretty different things that need to be sort of approached differently. So like the cumbersomeness, which is that, like, let's take the sort of infused joint example, and let's say that joint is infused with two different kinds of concentrate because it's very fancy. And so now you've got a product with two different concentrates, flour. So you have three different potentially tested products, and then you have one end product. And that end product only requires a potency test. And so the end product could end up with a COA that's just a potency test and none of the other information for it. I think that infused joint, you need to provide as the producer, and you need to expect as the retailer, the COAs for all of the products that are in it, as well as the end product. And that's the obligation of us as licensees to make sure that those products are getting delivered with all of the COAs that are nested within that product. And to go back to our friend, the JSON link, it does that work for us, and is something that makes life easier on our end to be able to do that, because it can build all of those previous lot numbers into the transfer. So that's one place where I think we can make life easier for ourselves as licensees is to use that approach, because then you can basically have your software direct the software to say, when converting or when sending the COA for this infused joint, send both the COA for the end product and all of the things that went into it. And so now you have a PDF package that has everything in there in one. And that's the sort of stuff that we can do, because that's the reality of a report and audit system. Is it's never going to stop somebody from doing something. It's going to be there for when we need to determine if there was wrongdoing. And so I think making sure that we're separating off the cumbersomeness of something that we are just getting used to and is new from how is it going to prevent people from manipulating the system? Because I'm in agreement with Justin that we shouldn't orient everything around just that. Like, a vast majority of us are trying to do the right thing, and we want tools that make it easy for us to do that. And I feel like a majority of our effort should be focused on making sure that we have what we need to do the good work and do it well, and not make mistakes that lead to these sort of errors. Because I personally don't think a lot of the issues are necessarily about people being nefarious, but probably more likely people being sloppy or being internally, having their internal communications within their firm maybe not aligned very well. And it is pretty cumbersome. And so I think just thinking about it in that context, where we have two kind of different things going on, is like the difficulty of using it versus the easiness of manipulating it. And they do kind of reinforce each other, because it becomes hard to tell like what's manipulation and what's just somebody who maybe doesn't know what they're doing making a mistake. Okay. And just wanted to highlight those kind of different things to think about.
Thank you. So it looks like we're down about 5 minutes left for this session. So just based on some of the early conversation in this session, I want to ask the group if it sounded like there needs to be some internal data evaluations for an effective evaluation from everybody's opinion. And so what are the next steps? Do you all want to meet again, or do you feel like we'll need to take a look at some of the data evaluation before meeting again? Or is there I don't want to call another meeting together if folks don't feel like there's value added to that. I'm certainly happy to have another meeting if folks want to continue the conversation. But it sounded early on, I mean, we're getting more suggestions and more concerns around what's working and what's not working based on the rule set, and that's kind of what we wanted to see. We didn't really talk a lot about unintended consequences today, and I actually heard somebody before, not in this meeting but outside, share something with me that I thought was an interesting aspect. So we certainly could have another meeting, but Jay, I see your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to have some way for this group to kind of keep communicating, at least in between big meetings. I don't know if we're ready for another, we need to add an additional meeting or not as far as that goes, but I feel like, we're all in between these 1 hour meetings, we don't really do much. And I think it would be great if the LCB would set up some sort of a format that we can have discussions on the side and, come up with ideas, so that when we come here, we can, make a little bit more progress or refine things or something like that. That would be my suggestion.
So let me throw this out to folks then. So if the work group would like to, look at things outside of the meetings, which that's great, what would you suggest licensees and labs be able to look at for evaluation? And what would you want to come back to a later meeting with input on, or an evaluation of? I mean, we can start looking at some of the data that we have, but from a licensee perspective, what would you be considering doing as a work group to bring back to this, discussion? I see Jay's hand still up. I don't know if that was new or old, but go ahead.
It was old, but sorry, I've got to take it down.
That's all right.
But I mean, I think, we have a lot of experience here, and I think, all these questions, we can provide information. Like, I've certainly done my analysis of, my public record request. I agree with Amber. It takes a while to get it sometimes, but it usually comes through. But if you as the if you want to propose something to us to look into, like any one of these questions or all of them, I think we'd all be happy to chime in here and there. Okay. and add time. I would be. I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I speak for myself.
Okay. So any other comments? Kathy, did you want to chime in before we?
I was just going to offer. I lead the cannabinoid science work group, and in between meetings, and they're spaced, 2 months apart. We do work in between those meetings, and we do that primarily by email exchange. But if that's something that this group is interested in doing, I think that's something that Justin and I could help with. So maybe I'll do a follow-up after this meeting to see if that's something that this group would be interested in doing. And it's, different interest areas that people have. We vote on different things, like what are we going to talk about next time, those kinds of things. And I know, Amber, you're on that group, and that group is, kind of over time been able to hone down on what it is, and then rank the topics that they want to talk about based on those conversations that happen in between meetings. So I'm happy to set this up for this group as well. Yeah.
So Danielle, last comments before we wrap up here.
There's something that would help me out a lot before we meet again is I sent, 15, 17 questions to the LCB to help me specifically, because the group wanted me to make sure it was for me, that will really help me understand where to focus my energy. And so if I can get answers to those questions, that would help. And obviously it's shared with the entire group.
Yeah, and quite frankly, in looking at some of the questions, and I know Jeff was working on developing that for you, not all of those pertain to evaluating these particular rule sets. So I understand that there's questions and background and those types of things, but as it relates to evaluation, I'm a little concerned that if we do put it all back out to the group, that it will get the scope of the work group will change. And so we really want to do the evaluation, and there may be other issues that we need to talk about at some point, but I think that that's a risk of putting out answers to questions that don't have the direct connection to an evaluation of this rule set.
Could we just write outside of scope?
We could.
To me, because that's part of the questions too. I think that you have to take a comprehensive look to figure things out, and I think a lot of them have to do with these rule changes. Because when I read the purpose of the work group, it was these rule changes as well as anything else that may need to be identified or addressed. And I think all these questions kind of encapsulate all of that.
Okay.
But if you don't want us to talk about some of them, I'm happy with out of scope.
No, it's not that we don't want to talk about them. I just don't know if it's effective to talk about them in this context, if you will. But we'll connect again with Jeff and work on some responses, because looking through your questions, I think that there's a number of things that if clarification is needed, we should be providing that. So that's fine. We're out of time, so what we'll do is we'll circle back internally before we set up any further meeting. And if there's something that we can identify that would be helpful for the licensees to evaluate, we'll put that out to the group. If not, at this point, we're looking at some of the internal data monitoring issues that we need to strategize about. We'll let you know what that's going to look like, so everybody's not just left wondering what's going on, and then we may end up needing to suspend some time in between the next meeting so we can have some data to talk about. And I see no hands, so that's probably no final comment. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude today. So I thank everybody for attending, and we really appreciate the feedback and the thoughts that you had about this. So thank you very much.